Hello everyone. Thank you very much for joining today's webinar session. My name is Manish Gupta and I will be your moderator today. And today's session is going to be a great session for instructional designers or those who are using the authoring tools to produce SCORM courses. Today we are joined by two experts, Brian Rush and Ajay Upadhyay, who will be presenting today's session and taking your questions. So we all know that SCORM is a technical standard that's used for packaging training material to create courses. And this is done by using authoring tools such as Captivate, Articulate, iSpring. And then these courses are uploaded into learning management systems so that learner can play these courses. And then all tracking and reporting takes place inside the learning management system. So this is going to be a two-part webinar. In today's session, we are going to cover and discuss about the SCORM, how you can use the different training materials to author your courses using the authoring tools, and we'll discuss various settings. And in the second webinar, which we will be announcing, in that webinar, we'll be discussing some additional features like interaction, objectives, hand coding, and we'll also cover in that session how SCORM can be used in runtime by uploading into LMS's actual user experience reporting and tracking. So with this, I'm going to hand it over to Brian. Brian?
Well, thank you, Manish. Appreciate that introduction. As Manish said, this is targeted primarily at instructional designers today. We can start by saying, what is SCORM? And with that, let's define first the shareable content object, or SCO. They're the smallest unit of information that can communicate with the LMS. They're a means of chunking content and can map to learning objectives. And SCORM is used to create these packages of content. SCORM stands for Shareable Content Object Reference Model. It enables the packaging of content for learning management systems to deliver. That's one of its main use cases. The other is a set of technical standards to enable the communication between a course and an LMS during runtime. SCORM is the most widely used e-learning standard available. It was developed and governed by ADL originally about 15 years ago for the Department of Defense. The Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative is a U.S. government program for research and development and policy on distributed learning. And this illustration shows at a high level how SCORM is involved in both the packaging of content and the runtime communication. We're going to talk about each of these in detail, but first let's look at this process as a whole. Once a content developer has configured the course and test and enabled it for reporting, the course is then published as a PIF, or package interchange file. The instructions in the package find the API, or application programming interface, and initiate communication with the API, which then interfaces with the learning management system. We'll dive more into each of these. Let's look at packaging first. So packaging is done as soon as the instructional designer or content developer has designed and built their course, and there's a need to make the content available to learners, authoring tools, content repositories, or learning management systems. The IMS content packaging specification was designed to provide a standard way to structure and exchange learning content and provides a common input-output format that any system can support. This graphic you're seeing here is the IMS content packaging conceptual model. A package represents a standalone unit of usable and reusable content. It's a logical directory which includes a specially named XML file. That's this IMS Manifest over here. Any XML control documents it directly references, such as DTDs or XSD files, and then contains the actual resources. So you can see here, we've got the package itself, the outer box, and then this inner box, the dark blue one, is the manifest itself. We're going to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. So a manifest is a mandatory XML document, and it represents the information needed to describe the contents of the package. As I mentioned, the IMS Manifest.xml file name, that's always used as the file name, it can't change. Metadata is an XML element that describes the content package as a whole. So metadata is data about data, right? But This metadata enables the search and discoverability of the content package itself. It also enables a mechanism for describing the characteristics of the content package. If we look at organizations, this component is used to describe how the content is organized within the content package. It may contain one or more organizations, each of which describes a particular hierarchical structure for the content of the package. So here you're seeing the organizations, plural, and then the organization, singular. In this case, this XML document only has one organization. Resources is an XML element containing references to all of the actual resources and media elements, including the metadata describing the resources and any references to any external files. Submanifests are optional, not often used, but they describe any logically nested units of instruction that can be treated as standalone units. These child manifest elements are referred to as submanifests. So content developers can create instructional objects that could be recombined with other instructional objects to create different courses. And they would want to describe each instructional object in its own manifest and then aggregate those manifests into the higher level manifest. So that's very useful for the purposes of reusable learning objects and multi-SCO courses. Let's look at the manifest settings and how they're generated from this Captivate tool. While we're in Captivate and we finished our design and are ready to enable reporting for this, we click that checkbox. And then on the right side of the standard is a button to open the manifest. And that will open this window on top. And this is where you define a number of parameters. The identifier and the title for both the course and the SCO, each of these smaller green boxes here. In this case, this is one SCO inside this course, so we only have this one right here. But if you're going to create a multi-SCO course, you'll want to make sure that you keep the identifier the same for the course and then have a unique identifier for each SCO. So we'll go into a multi-SCO course a little bit later, but from here you can see the identifier for the course is this identifier right up here of the organization. The title is this title right here underneath the organization. Then we have an item identifier that's named after this identifier here, and then the course object title itself is right here. So that's how it looks in the IMS Manifest XML document after publishing and finding this particular file at the root level. So next we can talk about the runtime. Once the content is launched, SCORM uses algorithms to find the API. All communication between the SCO and the LMS happens through a JavaScript API. This is the only way for communication to occur, and no other channels are available. So you can't communicate through web services or forum posts or database rights or any other mechanism, only through this JavaScript API provided by the LMS. And then once SCO has found the runtime API, it can use it to inform the LMS of communication, such as states, such as initialized and terminated between a content object and the LMS, and then retrieve and store data, such as score, time limits, etc., between the LMS and the SCO. SCORM provides 8 runtime API functions. On the left, you'll see SCORM 1.2, and SCORM 2004 is on the right. So very similar in purpose, but just slightly different in syntax. So note that only the SCO can initiate this communication here. The LMS is a passive entity that simply responds to the API calls made by the content. It just launches the content and responds to requests. These are some of the runtime communication data model elements that are commonly used. Runtime communication syntax varies significantly between 1.2 and 2004. And the permutations of 2004 have more data model elements with each released edition. Many of them are self-explanatory. The ones on the left in bold are the 2004, and those in parentheses are the 1.2 data elements. And so completion status indicates when a user has finished a course. Success status, on the other hand, indicates when a user has passed or failed a course. You'll notice these two are the same for 1.2 here, and we're going to get into that. The score scaled indicates the score that the learner earned. Usually you'll want to pass along the minimum and maximum score as well. The session time is the amount of time that the learner spent in the SCO. Location is a free text field for the SCO to record a bookmark. There's other bookmarking features available too, we'll talk about. CMI exit indicates how the learner is exiting the SCO. You want to set it to suspend to ensure that the current attempt is preserved. Or if you set it to an empty string, it will indicate that the LMS should begin a new attempt with a new set of runtime data on the next launch of the SCO. And then suspend data provides space to store and retrieve data between learner sessions. It's oftentimes used to store bookmark information as well. So the inevitable question is, what do I use, SCORM 1.2 or 2004? And naturally the answer is, it depends. With sequencing, the specific order flow can be prescribed. So if that's something you need, 2004 is going to be the way to go. But likewise, measuring progress, if you want to have someone exit out of a course and see where they were, you can use the CMI progress measure in order to track that progress. The suspend data field that we just mentioned is much larger, 15 times larger in 2004 than it is 1.2. And with that, if you're going to be doing a lot of bookmarking or any other kind of data storage, you're going to probably need the 2004 one. And interactions, oddly enough, in 1.2, they're write-only, so they can't be read once they've been written. Whereas with 2004, they can be a read-write. Another important criterion for determining which version is how granular you need your reporting. With 2004, you get a lot more data and potential analysis with not only the choice that was made by the learner, but also the correct response, the question type, the question stem, and question weighting, latency, which is the amount of time they spent on the question, and then the timestamp itself. So more granular reporting, deeper analysis, you'll be able to do more with 2004. And then this last one, the status variables for completion and success, that's only one variable for 1.2 and two variables for 2004. So they're separate for 2004, whereas they're combined or rolled into one with 1.2. And that brings us to this slide. Status settings. Again, this is the Captivate setting here, but Articulate is very similar, and I'm sure iSpring is too. And you're going to be able to see here that these status variables, we have two of them in 2004 in green over here, completion criteria and success criteria. Whereas in 1.2, success and completion are rolled into this one called cmi.core.lesson status. So this one is trying to be everything: completed, incomplete, passed, failed, browsed, not attempted. This one, we've got it separated. It's completed and incomplete for this variable and passed and failed for this one. In SCORM 1.2, completion status and success status were rolled up into this single entity. And in this world, it was impossible for the content to tell the LMS if a failed status meant that the user should be allowed to take the content again or not. With 2004, it can indicate whether the learner has completed the associated SCO, in other words, consumed the content or read the number of slides, or at least viewed them. And it can also be more expressive about whether a failure was final. So making use of both the completion status and the success status can be really important and drive your decision in terms of whether you need 1.2 or 2004. Next, we're going to look at the Multi-SCO course. This was mentioned earlier briefly, but what this is three separately published SCOs. So in Captivate, for example, you'd want to create your SCO, publish it, and then do the same for each individual SCO. And then you can use something called the Multi-SCO generator in Captivate, in which you'll pick those three files and then add them to this course. And this is then called a cluster. So this cluster here, you're seeing it as the content wrapper. That was a name given by Captivate, and that's just a generic name for it. And you have the choice here with this checkbox to force the module sequence. So it will open with 1, And then with that box checked, it will enforce the order to go from 1 to 2 to 3. Otherwise, you can go to any one you want. So here you can see we've got the Multi-SCO course as the overarching parent here. And then within the wrapper, we've got SCO item 1, SCO item 2, and SCO item 3. We can talk a little bit more about that, but as I mentioned earlier, you want to be sure to use the same course identifier for each of these SCOs, but differentiate each SCO with a unique identifier. Looking at this same XML document a little bit closer, this inner part here is the sequencing. Sequencing is what happens between SCOs and outside of SCOs. So when a learner exits a SCO, sequencing is responsible for determining what happens next. Sequencing determines what navigational controls and options are available to the learner. So that's these here that you're seeing on this line for control mode. Each of these has its own unique attribute, and these attributes allow certain things or enable certain things, like the table of contents for navigation is controlled by this choice attribute here. Flow enables previous and next buttons for navigating, and choice exit allows the learner to jump out of this activity. Furthermore, it orchestrates the flow and status of the course as a whole. Using sequencing is optional. If no sequencing rules are specified, the default settings will provide an adequate experience for the learner in most general cases. And then roll-up rule actions are the actual placement of the satisfied or completed state. So the conditions are the if statements essentially, and then the actions are the writing to the status. So now it's time to go in for a demonstration. And what I'd like to do at this point is go to our XML editor here and expound a little bit more on what we were looking at with this content wrapper. So if we look again, we've got the ADL SCORM schema. This is 2004 third edition is our schema version. The organization name is 3SCO Package, and they append the _org to that. We've got our cluster wrapper, and then if we open up this item line, and you'll see this is the first SCO that I named it as when I created that first individual SCO. And so each of these has its own objective and its own measure weight. So then once we've looked at each of those SCOs, we can look at the overarching sequencing. As we mentioned earlier, we've got the control mode here. So we've already talked about that. But then with these roll-up rules, we have the conditions. And so the roll-up conditions, in this case, you can use any logical operator such as any or all or not, and that will drive a lot of these. So for example, if this roll-up rule for this child activity says any, then this operator not with the condition satisfied will result in an action called not satisfied. That's what's going on with each of these. And you define these rules so that in this multi-SCO document, you are able to discern from each of these sub-modules whether or not they're completed, and then the overarching one is rolled up and marked as completed as well. So I'm scrolling back up now to look at the XML namespaces for this manifest. You'll see here the XML namespace called ADL sequencing, and then we've also got another one for navigation. I'm going to venture over to the Finder here for a moment and show you that this one is the IMS Manifest that is inside of Captivate. The Captivate has various templates, we'll see in a minute, and then the template has the LMS, Standard, SCORM, Default, 2004 for example, and then Dynamic. So this IMS Manifest, which we will look at, has some of the more proprietary kinds of things in it. So you're seeing here at CP course description. So that's a variable that Captivate uses to take the course description you put inside of the setting that you were controlling in the earlier example and carry it over into this XML document. Likewise, with the objective ID here, it's doing this with this particular variable. Let's now go over to the Captivate side of things, where we can do some quiz settings. This is a small course, and it's got 4 slides and 3 test questions, and then the results slide. And the various slides here are quiz settings. One of the first things we'll need to do is click this checkbox to enable reporting. There are a number of templates already in place within that folder that we were looking at in the Finder earlier. So Moodle is one that's pre-configured, Question Mark and Adobe Connect are a few others, but most of us are going to opt for the other standard LMSs. And then we get to pick our standard. In the case of SCORM, we have our choice from 1.2 to 2004. AICC is very rarely used. XAPI is a topic for another webinar, but once we've chosen SCORM 2004, we then can configure it. And if you'll recall, this opens up our manifest dialog box, and this is where we get to choose which edition or version of the SCORM 2004 we would like. SCORM 2004 3rd edition seems to be the most popular, but here again is the course identifier and the SCO identifier, and the course title and the SCO title. So in this simple course, it's one SCO, one course, but it's always a good idea to get in the habit of naming your SCO identifiers and perhaps even using the course identifier as a prependage to naming your SCO identifier. That might make your reporting analysis a little neater and easier to analyze when you have things set up that way. The version here is 1.0 in this case, but generally speaking, each time you're going to republish a course and then upload it to the learning management system for an update, you'll want to version this up as well so that the LMS doesn't get confused. Moving down here, we have these templates. This is what I was showing in the Finder earlier. So if you have an LMS that can do some more things than what might be found in the default template, or there's certain information that it needs in addition to that, you can create a custom template based on that XML document. So with completion criteria, you can use user access, which is essentially just a launch and complete. You're just saying the user access that. And then you can use slide views and or quiz. In this case, I want them to view all 4 slides, which it will be hard not to do, actually, without getting to the quiz, since we don't do any branching here. But we want them to view 100% of it and at least attempt the quiz. So we'll say they've completed it at that point. Now, success criteria, on the other hand, in this case, we're concerned more about the quiz itself and not the slide views. In this case, we want it to be passed. One of the items that you can also see here that I have checked is interaction data. This is in addition to the interaction data that is comprised of the question choices and the like. The initialization text here, this is just what it says while it's loading. Hopefully you don't have to see that, but that's the text that's in front of them if it's a bad connection or whatever. Clicking this advanced button brings us up into these advanced settings here. Sending data on every slide is not encouraged. It's likely to run into some traffic issues with pinging the server each time. Never send resume data. That's for bookmarking, essentially. I have that one unchecked. However, if somebody completes their course, I don't want them to just see this particular slide with the results on it where they left off. I'd rather they come back to the first slide and send it to normal after completion. This last one, escape version and session ID, refers mostly to AICC publications, so we don't really have to be concerned with that one for SCORM. So that's the reporting part of the quiz settings. If we go further in, we can interact with this settings here and tell each question should shuffle its answers or choices. We can control which navigation shows on here. If they have picked a particular question that they want to clear, we can include the clear button. and then the back button or skip. These are all controllable here, so we can have these buttons in navigation show. If we wanted to wait for it to submit all at the end of the quiz, that's an option as well. Or it could be branch aware, so that if they've answered a certain question one way, it can go in one direction and have a different pool of questions to draw from. Likewise, we can show progress, whether it be relative or absolute. Allowing backward movement can be controlled here if somebody is wanting to go back and change an answer. Showing the score at the end of the quiz, that's this results slide that will be shown. Allowing the user to review the quiz is another one. What I have chosen here is to hide the play bar in the quiz, so it's just a forward progress only. Our quiz results messages are configured here, so this is our pass message. Congratulations, you passed the quiz, or sorry, you failed. And we can have an action of sending that via email and including these various parameters. When we are choosing our pass or fail here, in this particular case with just 3 questions, 100% of the points are required. You could make it more absolute and just say 30 points, but it's going to be the same thing in the end, because this is only 33 1/3 for each one of these questions. So then we can have certain actions be conditional on whether or not you've passed. So if we pass, we can say continue. Otherwise, it can do any number of actions that are prescribed here, such as hide the TOC, the table of contents, or execute some advanced actions, or JavaScript, or open another project. As you can see, there's quite a few choices here. In this particular case, I just have continue, but it's not able to continue anywhere else anyway. So I'm just gonna say pause. I could have it exit and it'll close this course altogether. In the case of multi-SCO courses, you don't want to do that with each of your individual SCOs, because it'll close the entire course, including the parent course. So I'm going to just say pause for right now on that one. If a failing grade, I can allow the user 3 attempts. For example, I could put in any number here, or infinite attempts. And then this will control the display of the retake button. So in this case, I'm going to say infinite attempts, show the retake button, and then that closes off the action choice here. So I can let them go around as many times as they'd like. Then you have the default labels. These are all just the canned items that are going to come up as feedback for each of these scenarios, such as retrying or incomplete, things like that. That just allows you to do it one time here in this one preference, and then you could save this preference and use it for all of your assessments, for example. And so that's everything on the quiz side. On the project side, this is less about SCORM, but so that's pretty much it for the preferences that I've set for the quiz. Now it's time to publish. I click this publish button here, and again, you have some prescribed items here for Adobe, things like Connect and its LMS called Captivate Prime, or mobile devices. In this particular case, I'm going to publish for devices, a more generic way of doing it. Here, this was chosen in the project settings. I'm only making this an HTML5 course instead of SWF and HTML5, SWF being the Flash movies. Flash is deprecated right now, and it's not going to be around after next year. Some of the browsers are already planning on phasing it out for mid next year, but the actual end of life is the end of next year. So zipping files is typically always done. You can always unzip it once you get there and see which files are in there if you need to do any editing to the manifest or anything like that. It has 8 slides within it. 3 of them have audio. I've got some custom audio settings created here. Again, we chose SCORM 2004. It doesn't show the 3rd edition, but if I click this link, I'll go back to that same screen we were on. Mobile gestures, in case this is on an iPad, I've enabled that. And then I would click publish, and then that would create that zip file, and it will show in my Finder window here. I keep it in my output files. So that's the black hole CPTX file. If I open up, you'll see in here the black hole zipped and unzipped. So here are the files within it. We've got a number of XSD files that we mentioned earlier that control the XML files, the index SCORM.htm, and has some of the SCORM driver files like the goodbye.html. Again, here's our IMS Manifest, and the browser sniff is some JavaScript that will detect which browser you're on and anything to do with HTML5 verification, making sure your browser is capable of that. And so that's all you'll see here in all the files. The pools is your question pools. And while I'm in here, I'm going to show you the 3 SCO package. So this is the parent course of these 3 SCOs. So going back to our Captivate for a moment, here you'll see SCO 1 is nothing more than a slide, a question, and the results, which I have hidden. So if we were to preview this, you'll see that it just plays for 3 seconds and then plays for 3 seconds, tells me that this is SCO 1, and then allows me to choose whether I want to pass this particular individual SCO or not. So each one of these is identical. And if we look at our quiz settings for this one, for example, and we look at the manifest, each of these has the identifier for the course as the Multi-SCO course. And the title is my 3rd SCO in this case, and it has some description. This is the 3rd of the SCOs in this Multi-SCO course. And again, we see we've got the SCO identifier here. So SCO ID 3 is this one, whereas obviously SCO ID 2 here and SCO ID 1 here. So that's what's going on here. Each one of these is the same SCORM version edition, 3rd edition. I would imagine that it would get confused if you published different editions of different ones and then did the overarching one, something other than that. So you want to keep those consistent. So what you need to do in order to open the Multi-SCO course actually is go to the Adobe Multi-SCO Packager. So as I mentioned earlier, this is where you'll pull in each of your 3 files, and then you'll be able to click the reinforcement of the module sequencing here. And then this is where you would create a new course, and this is where you publish the course. So that pretty much wraps it up for using the various tools. I want to go back to the presentation for a moment here and show you that it also allows something very similar in Articulate. These are the quiz settings you would see if you were doing the same kind of exercise that we just went through with Captivate. So very similar. You've got the title, SCO information, course information. This particular one happens to be 1.2, so it's only got the one past incomplete reporting capability rather than the 2 separated ones that we talked about earlier. Again, how many slides they've viewed, whether you've passed the quiz, things like that. So that's something very similar, and I'm sure there's a lot of other authoring tools that have very similar types of UIs that match these kinds of things. So with that, I'm going to hand this back over to Manish and take it from there.
All right,
Manish.
Thank you very much, Brian. Excellent session. Thank you for covering such details and providing insight to it. So we do have a few questions here, so I can just go over some of those questions here. So the first question we have here is, if I increment the version of IMS Manifest and republish it for LMS, will I get a different reporting?
Thanks, Manish, for the question. This is Ajay. So happy to answer this. Generally, the version of the manifest that you are putting in the authoring tool represents your own change control related stuff as opposed to reporting in most systems, especially in Ejubright. I can talk about what we do. So as long as you are not updating the identifier of the SCO, you will get a consolidated report, whether it was taken prior to update, whether the content was taken by the learner before update or after update. And in fact, we recommend to not update the IDs if you are just updating the content with some minor fixes. If there is a major revision and you want to have different data captured for the post revision and keep it separate from what was captured before, like who took the course before update and after update. So then update the activity ID or the SCO ID, but just the manifest version won't have any direct effect on the reporting.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Then another question is, I think Brian covered it, but I think this may be a little bit from the reporting perspective you can answer, that can I have a multiple SCO in a course?
Oh yeah. So I think most of the systems which provide compatibility with SCORM 2004 should support multi-SCO. EduBrite does support multi-SCO. So what happens is within a EduBrite course, when you upload a SCORM package, that is basically a zip file, and that becomes a module within EduBrite course. So in a EduBrite course, you can have many such SCORM packages, which are basically many such modules from LMS terminology. But inside each of those modules, it's your choice whether you have a single SCO or multiple SCO. So if you build package with most of the time, we see that authoring tools export your content in a single SCO format. That is 99% I've seen. But if you are using the 2004 features, then you may have used multiple SCO output format. So you can use that. We support it. And in fact, you will get the activity reporting captured within LMS for each of those SCO. And in fact, if you are not using 2004, then also you could simulate the similar behavior in 1.2 by uploading individual single SCO files as multiple modules within the same course in EduBrite. Okay. So you have both options. So either you package multiple SCO within a single SCORM package, upload it as one module, or you break it down into multiple SCO into each package and create multiple modules within the LMS.
So multiple SCORM files is going to be uploaded in that case. Yeah. Okay, great. Another question is related to the mobile compatibility. So the question is, are SCORM mobile compatible?
Yeah, for the most cases, yes, unless you are using a SCORM that was built several years before, because previously Flash was the predominant output format from all these authoring tools. But hopefully you're not using any of those old exported package still. If you are still having those packages, you can each of these tools also provide some upgrade utilities. So you can upgrade your packages and make them more HTML5 compatible. And once it is HTML5 compatible, then it should run on any mobile device as well.
Okay, great, thanks. And then I have another question here on the sizing limitation part of it. So is there any size limit, or should the author creating the course worry about the total size of the SCORM?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good practical question. So just for reference, several years ago, Windows file system, they had a limit of any file, the max size was 2 GB, but that was several years ago. And now you can have on a file system file which is very, very huge possible. But you should always think about if you create a file SCORM output, which is several gigabytes in size, then it will affect your upload time into the LMS. Second, if you're using any cloud-based LMS, then it will consume a lot of storage space on the LMS side. And more importantly, if you had ended up creating a very large SCORM output package, which is huge, several gigabytes, then the only reason it is huge would be because of the content you have packaged inside it. And the content could be large videos, most likely. I mean, you may have some images, audio files also, but they are generally not that big. So only if you have a lot of high definition videos or unoptimized videos packaged inside your content, that will result in large SCORM package size. And not only it will affect your upload time into the LMS, but more importantly, it will affect the download time for all the learners when they go through the content. So, I mean, we should be able to compromise on just one-time upload experience, but I think everyone will agree that the download time, which will be faced by all learners, is not compromisable. So the advice is to always optimize your videos using any encoding tools like Handbrake. If you put them inside the SCORM, it will make it very short. Or if you want, you can also keep your videos external to the SCORM itself and just reference it without packaging them within the same zip file.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Then I have a couple of more questions I'll go through real quick. This is an interesting question that can we avoid a SCORM? When are they best utilized? Talking about some alternatives.
Yeah, I think, if you look at the history, spec is about 20 years old when it started, and then the last update was done in 2004, spec 2004. It's almost 15 years. So the SCORM specification was good for the time it was created in. At that time, there were not much option for standardized learning, or there were not many cloud-based learning management systems available, which may have alternate methods available for simple course building. So people had only one option to create and build SCORM packages and put it in an LMS, which had no authoring capabilities. So in those times, of course, there was no other option but to use SCORM. Nowadays, pretty much all learning management systems have some built-in lightweight content authoring or assembly, at least, available. So if you can avoid SCORM, yes, there are options to use the LMS specific authoring options. And SCORM still is probably best suited for interactive, highly interactive content. You may have some content which has simulation, a lot of animations. So for those kind of rich experience, I don't think LMSs would provide you an authoring tool. So it's best to have a dedicated or more sophisticated authoring tool to create it, which will be some kind of desktop tool which are outputting your content in a SCORM format so that you can upload it in the LMS. So yeah, for simulation, animation-based scenario, use SCORM. But if you don't have to use SCORM, you can avoid it for at least the simple content.
Okay, great. And which naturally takes me to the last question. You talked about some of the benefits of, or in the scenarios where the SCORM is used, if there are possible alternatives nowadays available in the SCORM. So if you can describe this question is some high-level limitations of the SCORM.
The prerequisite is that it requires some instructional design expertise, a little bit more technical expertise for using SCORM as a content producer. And then also for ongoing stuff, if you are not familiar with SCORM intricacies, then you might run into some issues on an ongoing basis. You might not understand where the issue is, whether it's on the content side or it's in the LMS side. So you end up spending more time troubleshooting. So those are some of the limitations we see, especially with people who just start using SCORM but don't fully invest their time in going deeper into it. So that's one of the main drawback. But there are a few other things also. Like SCORM is generally suited for like a full serious e-learning kind of scenario. And nowadays there are other trends in the industry such as micro-learning or informal learning, in which case you might want your content to be anonymously available also. So in those cases, my opinion especially is that SCORM is not that well suited. For those type of scenario, you are rather advised to have the content directly uploaded in LMS for serving.
Great. Thank you very much for a wonderful explanation here. With this, we can go to the conclusion of today's discussion.
So the biggest benefit of SCORM is that it very clearly defines the tool's roles. So there are authoring tools which you use to build the SCORM content, and there are LMS tools which are used for actually delivering the SCORM and tracking and reporting. So there is no confusion. You generally don't expect a LMS to provide the authoring capability or authoring tools to provide the reporting capability. So it's very clearly defined roles and responsibilities. And so are the vendors in the industry. So there are some tools vendor, authoring tools vendor, and then there are LMS tools vendor. It definitely is a very well-defined standard. Therefore, it has kind of resulted in a lot of choices with respect to authoring tools vendors as well as LMS vendor. So as a content developer, you have choice. You can use one authoring tool to some extent and put it in any other LMS. So if in case you want to change your LMS, you have the choice as long as you have the output format in the SCORM. So your content is pretty much LMS cross compatible. And of course, it is most widely used still, although it is very still kind of getting old, almost 15-year-old, but it is still very widely used. Cons, of course, it requires technical expertise. So be prepared to spend some time looking through the technical aspects of SCORM if you want to use it. generally, there are some support issues, mainly arising from not having enough clarity about where the issue could be. So people might ask questions to a LMS vendor, but it might be an issue with the content settings itself. So it results in kind of some support from both sides. It's a black box model. So LMS doesn't know anything about what is packaged inside your SCORM. So what you uploaded, LMS, even though LMS serves it, it cannot peek inside what you have packaged. Therefore, there is a limit to how much reporting you can get out of it. So that is, I think, one of the biggest ongoing limitation, not just content production side. Production side, it's good, but on the reporting side, it does provide some kind of limitation on the reporting within LMS. And also it is heavily JavaScript based. So it's not that well suited for some of the other type of applications which are not browser based, like desktop application or native mobile application, which are not hybrid. So yeah, so those are some of the cons. So that summarizes the benefits and some drawbacks of SCORM.
Yeah,
but still,
great.
It's a great solution for advanced e-learning course development.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Ajay. So you can be connected with us through the users community on the university site, or you can subscribe to Twitter to get the news and updates and announcement of the all upcoming webinars from EduWait site. So with that, I would like to thank Brian and Ajay for leading today's webinar, and thank you very much all of you for joining today's informative session. Thank you very much, everybody.